Okay, so have you ever wondered about soulmates? Like, are they real or is it all just, a fantasy?
It's a question that's captivated people for centuries, right?
Totally. And we're diving deep into it today with this article, The Science Behind Soulmate Connections. Are they real?
Hmm, interesting title.
Right.
Ah.
I'm really curious to see what they say. So is it destiny? Is it all about science, or are we just talking about some happy chemicals in our brains?
Well, one thing's for sure, just the belief in soulmates can have a real impact on your relationships.
Do it.
Yeah, there is this research from the University of Toronto. They found that people who really believe in soulmates, like really buy into the idea, they tend to jump into relationships faster
Oh, interesting.
and they commit more quickly. Plus, that honeymoon phase, the one I'm talking about,
Oh, yeah.
it's way more intense for them and they're much more satisfied.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Like, if you think you found the one that fate, picked just for
We're
you.
going to go all in, right?
Exactly. And probably every little good sign you see is like, yep, see, we're meant to be.
Yeah.
But what about when that honeymoon phase is over? What happens then?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it kind of highlights this potential downside to believing so strongly in soulmates.
Oh, so?
Well, think about it. Every couple hits those bumps in the road eventually, right? Disagreements, disappointments, the normal stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So if you're super committed to the idea of soulmates and then things get tough, do you start to question if you were wrong?
Like, oh, no, maybe we're not actually soulmates after all.
Exactly. Maybe it just makes it harder to work through those challenges because you have this preconceived notion of how the relationship should be.
I've definitely heard people say, if it's meant to be, it'll be easy. But maybe real connection isn't always about things being easy,
Right. Maybe it's about choosing to grow together, even when it's tough.
Work through the hard stuff.
Exactly. And, even when it does feel easy, like that effortless connection, our brains are actually working pretty hard behind the scenes, creating that sense of connection. Like there's a whole bunch of chemicals involved.
You're talking about brain chemistry, right?
Yeah.
The article mentioned that when we feel, deeply connected to someone, it triggers all this activity in our brains.
It's amazing, right? So one of the big players is oxytocin, which a lot of people call the bonding hormone.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
When you're with someone you're falling for, your brain just pumps out tons of this oxytocin, and that helps create those feelings of trust and attachment.
I see. So what about dopamine? Doesn't that have something to do with pleasure?
Yes, dopamine is all about reward and motivation. It's the reason why being around your special someone just feels so good. Your brain is basically being showered with these, happy chemicals, and that makes you want to be close to them even more.
Wow. So it's almost like our brain is tricking us into thinking, this is it, this is the one. But really, it's just chemicals doing their thing.
It's a bit like that, yeah. And there's actually another part of the brain that gets involved that I find really fascinating.
Okay, tell me.
It's called the anterior cingulate cortex. And this part, it becomes super active when you're away from the person you love.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, have you ever felt that, like physical ache when they're not around?
Definitely.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So the thing about the anterior cingulate cortex is it's associated with processing emotional pain. Like some researchers even compare those feelings of separation anxiety to phantom limb syndrome.
Wait, really?
Yeah, your brain is still like feeling that connection even when the person isn't physically there.
That's so wild. It makes breakup sound even worse now, though. Like you're literally going through withdrawal.
That's a really good point. And this brings us to another big piece of how we connect with others.
Yeah.
Attachment styles. Because it's not just about brain chemistry, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's also about how our early life experiences, especially in childhood, shape our patterns and relationships.
I've heard of attachment theory, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, it suggests that our very first relationships, with our parents or caregivers, those have a huge impact on how we approach and experience romantic relationships later in life.
So you're saying those early relationships basically create this blueprint for how we connect with other people?
Exactly. We develop certain attachment styles based on those early experiences, and those styles influence everything from how we communicate to how we handle conflict and intimacy.
Okay, so we've been talking about attachment styles.
Yeah.
How do those actually play into this whole soulmate thing?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Like, could it be that what we think of as a soulmate connection is really just our attachment styles kind of lining up in the right way?
I think that's definitely possible, yeah. Like imagine two people who both have a secure attachment style. They're
Yeah,
both comfortable with intimacy, good at communicating, they trust each other. That kind of relationship, it could definitely feel like a soulmate match, right?
that makes sense. And I guess for someone who maybe hasn't had the easiest time with relationships, who struggled with an insecure attachment style, finding a partner who helps them heal from that, who makes them feel safe and loved,
That can feel incredibly powerful.
like maybe even destined, right?
Absolutely. Like they were meant to find each other.
So maybe it's less about finding some predetermined soulmate out there and more about understanding our own attachment styles and how they
I
interact.
like that. It's about figuring out if those styles create a dynamic that feels good, that feels supportive, that works for both people.
It's about the connection you build, not just who the person is.
Right.
But, we've been talking a lot about the science of all of this, and the article does mention that too. But it also touches on some spiritual ideas around soulmates, ideas that have been around forever.
Yeah, those are definitely still popular.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I find them pretty fascinating.
Me too. I think for a lot of people, the whole soulmate concept goes beyond just science. There's this idea of a spiritual connection that's much deeper than the physical world.
Right. Like, science can explain some things, but maybe not everything.
Exactly. There are some parts of being human, some experiences that we may just not have the scientific answers for yet.
Totally. And the two of the most common spiritual ideas I've heard are, first, past lives and karmic connections.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And then there's the whole thing about energy and vibrations, like how
Yeah.
we all have our own energy.
So with the past lives thing, the idea is that you might meet someone and feel this instant familiarity.
Mhm.
Like you just know them, even though you've never met before in this life.
I've heard people say it's like picking up where you left off in a previous life.
Yeah. And sometimes difficult relationships are seen as opportunities for growth, like you're working through karma from a past life.
Okay, that's interesting. So what about energy and vibrations? What's that all about?
Well, it's the idea that we each have this unique energy signature, kind of like a fingerprint. And with soulmates, the thought is that their energy patterns would be like complementary.
Oh, okay. So they just vibe well together, even on an energetic level.
Exactly. And some people even believe you can sense that soulmate connection before you've physically met someone.
Just based on their energy.
Yeah. Pretty wild, huh?
It is pretty wild.
Yeah.
I like to look at things from both sides, though, the scientific side and the spiritual side.
I do too. You don't have to choose one or the other.
They both have something to offer.
And all this talk about soulmates, it makes me think about those people who say they've actually found theirs.
Oh, yeah. The article mentioned some real-life stories, right?
It does. I'm really curious to hear what their experiences were like. What about you?
Me too. Ready to hear their stories.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've got these three stories. Sarah, Michael, and Lisa. Each one is kind of different, right? Showing how these soulmate connections can happen in real life.
Yeah, totally different ways. Let's start with Sarah. Her experience was like dot bam, instant connection, like totally undeniable. She said it was unlike anything she ever felt before.
Wow. I wonder if that's what people mean when they talk about just knowing.
Yeah, like you just meet someone and you're
Like, yep, this is it.
Exactly, like two puzzle pieces fitting perfectly together.
Have you ever felt that kind of instant click with someone?
I mean, I don't know if science can really measure that click, but it's obviously a powerful feeling.
Yeah, totally. So Sarah's story is all about that initial spark, but Michael's is a bit different, right?
Right. With Michael, it sounds like personal growth was a big part of it. Like he did a lot of self-reflection, some spiritual exploration, and then he met his soulmate.
So it wasn't love at first sight for him.
Nope, not at all. It seems like that inner journey he took actually helped him recognize his soulmate when he finally met her.
That's really interesting. It
Yeah.
makes me think that maybe our own ideas about love, what we expect, maybe that influences who we're drawn to.
Oh, absolutely. We tend to be attracted to people who, in some way, reflect back to us parts of ourselves. Or maybe they challenge us to grow. It's fascinating. And then there's Lisa's story. Hers is a bit more unconventional.
Oh, yeah, she went to a psychic, right?
She did. And the reading helped her figure out some of her own relationship patterns,
Oh, interesting.
like the kind of energy she was putting out into the world.
I see.
And once she understood that better, she was able to recognize her soulmate when she met him.
So she kind of had to clear out some of those old patterns to make room for a better connection.
Exactly. And all three of these stories, even though they're so different, they all show us something important about soulmates.
What's that?
They're unique, personal, And they don't always make sense, whether it's instant recognition or growing into that connection or, getting some outside perspective. It reminds us that these bonds are deep and sometimes we can't explain them.
It's not like there's a step-by-step guide to finding a soulmate.
Right.
You just got to be open to the journey, trust your gut.
I like that. And, this brings us back to something we talked about before, the whole science versus spirituality thing. Can we appreciate both sides?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's so much research about the brain, how love works, attachment styles.
Right. But then there's this whole other layer of like dot mystery,
Hmm?
magic even.
It's almost like science explains the how, but maybe not the why.
Maybe.
And it's that why that keeps us all so fascinated with soulmates, right?
For sure. And I think even when we understand the science, it doesn't take away from the meaning of these relationships. If anything, maybe it helps us build stronger ones.
It's like having more tools in your toolbox.
Oh.
You can appreciate how amazing and complex our brains are, and there still leave space for those gut feelings, that sense of connection.
Exactly. Because no matter what we call it, soulmate, profound connection, whatever, there's no denying the power these relationships have to shape our lives.
That's a great way to put it. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of soulmates. We covered a lot today, the science, the spiritual side, even heard some amazing personal stories.
Lots to think about.
Now we want to hear from you. Do you believe in soulmates? Or do you think these connections are something we create? Head over to our social media and let us know.
We love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and keep diving deep.